Hello and welcome to this Philbert Flies review of iniScene's London Heathrow Airport scenery for Microsoft Flight Simulator. I'm looking at a pre-release build today, but as the airport's due to release later this week, I don't imagine there'll be any significant changes between this build and the release version. If there are, I'll update the video description to mention them, so if you're watching this after release, do click Show More below and have a quick read. I've been longing for a decent scenery for Heathrow more than any other airport add-on since the release of Microsoft Flight Simulator. Asobo's handcrafted Heathrow from the Premium Deluxe version of the sim has tided me over, but it's far from perfect. Is this the upgrade we've all been waiting for? Stay tuned to find out as I take you on a tour of the airport in different weather and lighting conditions and give you my opinion on it. Let's begin our look around here at Terminal 5A, specifically stand 516, and as always we're going to start by having a look at the jetway connecting to the aircraft. Nice smooth animations, and the jetway connects perfectly with no gaps and no sign of the hood going through the aircraft's skin. The custom jetways are nicely modelled and very detailed, with realistic advertising on them and a good few scuff marks and other imperfections in the textures. Terminal 5A is one of the few parts of the airport to feature tinted transparent glass and interior modelling, and we'll have a closer look inside in a minute. But first let's take a look at the modelling of the building itself. It's quite a complicated structure this, and you'll notice that the models are fairly detailed. So we have all of these sunshade systems well modelled. There is a little bit of flickering, but you get that in pretty much any MSFS scenery that features horizontal lines like these. The roof is really pretty impressive. You'll notice that we've got skylights, but what I'm particularly impressed by is the shape. It's a nice smooth curve, which isn't easy to achieve in this sim, and the textures are pretty crisp as well, and pretty detailed. You'll notice that there are many imperfections, bits of shadow, bits of dirt. It looks pretty realistic. The glass doesn't look bad at all. It appears to be roughly the right colour, the tint is good, there is a little bit of flickering off in the distance here, and the panes of glass are very perfect. There's no scratches, there's no deformity of the sort that we see in some of the best add-ons, but it gives a pretty convincing effect. Moving inside, and the interior modelling is pretty basic. You're not going to want to spend a lot of time inside the terminal here. You'll notice that the jetways don't really go anywhere in particular. They cut through the escalators, and again there's some weird texture issues, some weird bits of flickering here and there. But the impression from outside is pretty good, and that is the main thing. This is Terminal 5C. Now the B and C satellites at Terminal 5 are very similar to the main Terminal 5A building in terms of the glass areas, with similar levels of detail in the interior. You will notice here, however, that there's a little anomaly through the glass windows here, with these black squares appearing on the far side. I don't really know what that's about. It's also worth taking a quick look at this building on the south side of the C satellite. Now, it's a fairly generic looking building. It doesn't look much like the real thing. The roof colour's wrong, and the textures on the outside of it are fairly generic and not particularly realistic looking. You'll see that these windows here basically just go into the ground, so not much in the way of attention to detail here, sadly. The resolution of the textures is also pretty low. You don't have to get too close to notice just how blurry they are. This is Terminal 3, and the standard of modelling over here is pretty good in general. The textures aren't bad either. There's no transparent glass here unfortunately, but the opaque window textures don't look bad at all. There are some really impressive features such as the rust on these air conditioning ducts, and some less impressive features as well, such as these brick walls, which are very, very clean and slightly cartoony looking. Terminal 2 is also looking very nice. I'm impressed by the shiny marble effect on these jetway piers, and the glasswork, although opaque, is also looking very nice indeed. It is a bit of a shame that there is no transparent glass here, given that it is a largely glass building, but at the same time I guess compromises have to be made between detailing and performance, and unlike Terminal 5, when you're parking up at one of these gates you're not going to be looking straight through the windows because of all the clutter in between the aircraft and the building itself. Again, the glass, very very nice, lots of imperfections, nicely reflective, nothing to complain about really. The Terminal 2B satellite is done to a similar standard as the main Terminal 2A building, and in between the two we have a model construction site complete with moving cranes, which is a nice little detail. Terminal 4 is looking pretty nice as well, and I'm very impressed with the modelling here. These are actually 3D models, these sort of triangular pieces above the windows here, which is very nice to see. The textures are also very very crisp in this area, you can get right up to them and there's no noticeable blurriness at all. Very good use of PBR with a nice level of reflection up here, and again some pretty convincing opaque window textures. The brickwork at ground level looks quite nice, and the doors aren't anything like as blurry as the ones we saw earlier at Terminal 5C. This is the cargo terminal, which has some really nice features. The 3D signage looks pretty good, a few jagged edges here and there, which is a shame, but that's a very very nitpicky thing to say, so we won't dwell on it. The overall standard of modelling is very good. The textures are okay, they aren't the sharpest. If you get close you will notice a little bit of blurriness, and there's also some oddities, as you can see up here, these lines don't really flow as they should. But by and large it looks nice. And the cargo apron itself has quite a lot of ground clutter, which leads to it feeling pretty convincing and very immersive. I'm impressed by the attention to detail over in the maintenance area as well. The hangars and other buildings around here look really really good, with some nice weathered textures which are pretty crisp, and some really good detailed modelling as well. This fire service training plane looks really good as well. They've spent a lot of time getting this pretty spot on. I'm very impressed. And of course Heathrow wouldn't be Heathrow without the Concorde parked near the threshold of 27 left, which looks really good from the back and just ever so slightly dodgy from the front. But to be honest, as an ornament that you're going to taxi quite some distance from, you couldn't really want much more than this. iniBuilds have done a pretty good job of modelling the control tower. There are a few jagged edges around the bottom here, but by and large it looks very realistic, particularly these cables down the side, and the texture works very good as well. There's no transparent glass unfortunately, but the colour of the glass at the top looks pretty good. It could perhaps be slightly more green and slightly less black, but overall very good. Other than the Concorde that we looked at earlier, there are no static aircraft included with this scenery, which I think is a good call, but I know some people won't like. What we do have loads of is ground clutter, and we've got really really nicely modelled vehicles, air stairs, luggage dollies, etc, all over the airport, and we have some cones which appear to pop in when you get close, which I've only just noticed. But overall a really good job with the ground clutter, nice to have some life around the airport. Let's talk ground textures now. iniBuilds, I would say, have done a very very good job here. They've matched the materials used and their colours to the real airport very convincingly. They've also included some dirt around the aircraft stands, which looks alright. It's not the best I've seen, and it is a little bit blurry when you get up close, but overall the ground textures themselves are very crisp and very realistic looking. The taxiway markings are good. They're a nice shade of yellow, not too bright and cartoony, ever so slightly faded. They look pretty realistic. One thing that I have noticed that's missing, though, unfortunately, is roadways. So there's a road that runs all the way along here, and it's not marked out at all, and nor, as far as I can tell, are any of the roads around the airport. And, you know, that's not the end of the world, but it does make this area directly in front of Terminal 5A here, and similar areas across the airport, look a little bit barren and a little bit odd. While we're on the subject of roads, there are many places around the airport where the roadways go underneath the taxiways into tunnels, and they haven't done a great job of these. As you can see, there's no elevation change whatsoever, and there are also weird bits of satellite imagery which have been left in on the boundaries of these roadways, which look a little bit odd. Those of you who fly on online ATC networks will be pleased to hear that the various taxiway holding points are marked and labelled. This is Pluto, for example. And you'll see that all of the 3D signs are very nicely done, they're crisp and easy to read. The grassy areas mostly look pretty good, as do the transitions between grass and taxiway, which in most places are very smooth. There are one or two slightly jarring edges here and there, as you can see here, and there are also some areas where the taxiway transitions into a sort of weird blurry satellite image like we have here, which is a little bit of a shame, but not the end of the world. The runways look very good indeed. Some of the textures are a tiny bit blurry, but nothing to write home about. The markings are all 100% accurate. I really like the rubber around the touchdown zones. Yeah, I'm impressed by these. Let's take a look at some of the landside detailing. We'll start here outside Terminal 2, the Queen's Terminal, and as you can see, quite a lot of detail has been included, not least the Hilton Garden Hotel, the road network and the car parks surrounding it. Now this is a huge airport, and I think many developers would have been tempted not to bother too much with the landside areas, so I'm really pleasantly surprised by this. Yes, it's not the most detailed landside area we've ever seen, but it certainly adds a little atmosphere, and yeah, it looks pretty good, doesn't it? Here's the entrance to Terminal 3. You'll notice that we have some cars modelled on the top story of this car park, and some really nice ground textures down on ground level as well. The front of the terminal building is really impressive too, with a very crisp Breitling advert here and some excellent signage. The entrance to Terminal 4 is perhaps slightly less impressive. It's less detailed than what we've seen so far. We've got some slightly odd elevation issues going on and a bit of flickering, with less detail on the terminal frontage, but still not bad at all. And here's the entrance to Terminal 5. An impressive amount of effort has gone into this, you can see, with the multi-storey car park and the roadways and the textures all looking very good. A few weird anomalies like these railway lines just ending up in a wall, but really, for a landside area, this is all I want. iniBuilds have modelled many of the car parks along the north side of the airport, as well as a lot of the buildings along the Bath Road. And I'm sure many of you will be as relieved as I was to see that the fencing has been done very nicely as well. This is the entrance to Heathrow via the Heathrow tunnel from the M4. Now, this bridge here has been modelled, but it doesn't really line up particularly well with the roadway either side of it. Bit of a jump there for the cars. But you can't have everything, and it is nice to see quality road textures even this far out. And of course, we have the Emirates A380 model just here on this roundabout. iniBuilds have clearly done a lot of work with terraforming in this area. Unfortunately, the tunnel itself is blocked up, but that seems to be an issue in MSFS. I don't think tunnels are currently possible. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I don't think they are. But yes, overall, you can't complain about the amount of modelling that they've done around the airport, I don't think. It's really good. Here's Terminal 5A by night, and the night lighting is not great, I'm afraid. Any of you who has been to Terminal 5 by night will know that the terminal is really brightly lit from within, with the bluish-green light coming through these windows, and we just don't have that here. The light on the ground over the apron looks pretty good, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to have any light sources. We have light poles here, but if you look from underneath, they are not actually casting any light, so that makes it look quite odd. Unsurprisingly, the story is much the same over at Terminals 5B and 5C, and we'll pop inside 5B here, just have a look, and you'll see that even from within it's in almost complete darkness. Over at Terminal 3, although we still have unlit floodlights and mystery pools of light on the ground, the terminal itself looks slightly better. These opaque window textures do look reasonably convincing, although they are very, very low resolution. The Landside entrance to Terminal 3, however, does look pretty impressive with this pink light out the front. Some slightly better news over at Terminal 2B. While we still have quite blurry, opaque window textures, we do at least have lit floodlights, so this feels a little more realistic than what we've seen on the airside so far. But at Terminal 4, unfortunately, we still have no lights lit and just these mystery pools of light over everything. Now, how much is this going to affect your enjoyment of the scenery by night? Probably not a huge amount. It's the sort of thing that I look out for when I'm reviewing an airport. It's not the sort of thing most people are going to notice when they taxi onto a stand, probably. The taxiway and runway lights, however, look very good. Here's Heathrow in the snow, and as you can see there's a thick blanket over almost the whole thing. No snow on the buildings, and certain areas of roadway have no snow on them at all. Now we know that snow is very hard to work with in Microsoft Flight Simulator, and its thickness is based on the colour of the underlying ground textures. However, some developers have managed to work around this slightly better than iniBuilds have here. The biggest disappointment for me is that the runways are completely covered. It's just a thick blanket of snow with just some of the darker tyre marks showing through, and that's just not very realistic. Before we sum up, I do need to mention performance briefly. This is the only add-on airport that I've found to have a noticeable impact on my frame rate. You'll also have noticed a few stutters here and there as we've flown over the airport in the drone, and I've left these in deliberately. This isn't a criticism of iniBuilds in any way. I don't have the fastest of systems, you can see my specs in the video description down below, and Heathrow in any sim has always been tough on frames due to the density of London, but it is something to bear in mind. So what do I think overall? Well, this is a tough one actually. My hopes and expectations for an MSFS Heathrow add-on were huge, probably unrealistically so. I'd seen what the likes of Pyreeg, Flytamper, Flightbeam and NZA had achieved in the sim, and I desperately wanted something similar for Heathrow. That is undeniably not what we've got here. It's possible that something of that calibre would be unachievable here by any developer due to the performance impact, I don't know. But I do think something better than this is possible. I would describe iniBuilds Heathrow as a pretty solid representation of the airport. It's miles ahead of the Asobo handcrafted version, and it has plenty to recommend it. The ground textures are great, a lot of the modelling is great, some of the building textures are pretty good. It's clear from things like the extensive landside modelling that the developers have put everything they've got into this scenery, and it's one of those situations in which I feel really guilty about being critical. But I have to be, because that's what a review is. So here are the key bits that I don't like. The night lighting is the biggest thing by far, particularly when it comes to the interior lighting of Terminal 5. Turning up at a dark terminal by night is an immersion killer. The snow on the runway needs to be got rid of if at all possible. The odd blurry textures, including the nighttime window textures, could do with being upgraded. There's room for more weathering on the ground and on the buildings, and I'd like to see the airside roadways improved. So should you buy it? Absolutely, even if you have the Premium Deluxe Edition and therefore already have Asobo's Heathrow. It's not a bad product by any means. It's the best Heathrow add-on I've seen in any sim, and it's the only one we've got for MSFS, and it may well remain the only one we have for MSFS for years to come. So thank you to iniBuilds for tackling such a huge and challenging project, and well done on what you've achieved. I hope you found this review useful. If you have, please click the subscribe button, give the video a like, and only if you want to, you can buy me a coffee via buymeacoffee.com/filbertflies. Thank you very much for watching, and it would be great to chat to you on a live stream soon. Take care. Bye bye.